So help us put this in layman's terms. What should the audience at home kind of be aware of when we're looking out for the well-being of young people there? How do we know if we're doing enough?
Well, that's a big question, but you actually can communicate it fairly simply, I think, to most people we work with in the community. Think of it as a target. There's a goal. Child well-being is a goal comprised of where young people arrive when they're adults, that they're prepared, and who they get to be as children along the way. And so if you think of it as a readiness target, one of the things that child well-being does is it changes from thinking about specific problems and specific issues to thinking about the whole kid. Now that has big implications for measurement. Normally in communities what we measure is when things go wrong, when kids have kids, when kids are dropping out. But we don't have a lot of data about when they're doing well. When are they hopeful? When are they engaged, right? So it changes the paradigm for measurement, and it becomes a complete target of what you aspire to see the young child have as they develop and what they attain by the time they're young adults. So we call that the readiness target. And that includes things we normally think of, education and vocational preparedness. It thinks about mental and physical health and safety, and it thinks about their engagement and civic connections in the community. So it's a whole target, it's a whole person approach, and it really changes how you measure things.
And it's so critically important. Measurement is at the core of what it is that we do, because very few things that are not measured are really identified. And if you don't measure it in some sense, it doesn't exist. And so the only way that we can establish targets at the local level, at the community level, at the national level, is to engage in a systematic process of measurement. Thankfully, since the 1960s and the child indicators, since the origins of the child indicators movement, we actually have fairly reliable ways of measuring what it really means for a child to achieve well-being. And what we've been doing over the past 2 days is developing a consensus definition of what constitutes child well-being. What is the what? And the measurement really is the how. And once you have the what's in place, you can then align the how's in place so that together we can figure out how do we know if a child is actually achieving well-being or is not.
Was that an easy consensus to come to?
No. It was incredibly difficult. It took a fairly large amount of time. We began this process nearly 6 months ago. There were community convenings. We brought together academics, community partners, thought partners, practitioners in the community, academics, policymakers. And it was really an attempt to mind meld. It was really an attempt to take the very best of academic rigor, marry it with the greatest of practicality, feasibility, and utility from our community partners' perspective, and together co-construct this notion of what it is child well-being is all about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Think about why that would be hard to do. If you're trying to get consensus on one aspect of a child's life, that's easy. But if you're talking about whole child well-being, and from birth through to adulthood, you're asking a lot of stakeholders and a lot of different professions to come together. You just had the Federal Reserve and social workers and pediatricians at the same table, right? And there's a lot of different research traditions and language and measurement. So that's a lot of people to come to clarity and consensus around a really big idea. So it should take some time. It's not an easy thing to work out. The exciting thing is that it has been.
It must be important if they are all willing to sit down at the same table together, though.
It's absolutely critical. And I think Paul made a critically important point, which is many of us are specialists, especially in the academic community. And so we know one aspect of a child's well-being. So if I'm a psychiatrist, I really know what child mental disease is all about. But child well-being is much more than the absence of disease. It requires me to transcend my academic and disciplinary boundaries and stuff that I've gotten funded to do and the stuff that I've published on and things that I know how to do very, very well, and move my thinking onto a completely new and novel target. And that intrinsically is a cognitive shift. That's very, very hard to do.
One of the goals is to enjoy being a kid. How do you measure that?
Ask them.
That's right.
Seriously, we have a lot of opinions as adults about what kids think and what they need, and that's legitimate. We're raising children, but we often fail to include the voice of young people directly. One of the things of Forum for Youth Investment and many other people in working in measurement, we worked with Gallup to do a Gallup student poll, ask young people about hope, engagement, and well-being, and they will tell you. And you can get reliable, good measures that round out the full perspectives that you need.
There are international studies now that actually ask kids about their satisfaction with life. How is your life going? How happy are you? Are you happy at home? Are you happy at school? And kids actually tell you this stuff. And we know from these international studies that the stuff that kids tell you is very, very reliable. You can trust when kids tell you that they're happy, and you can trust them when they tell you they're unhappy. And if we can find ways to progressively align policies and repurpose programs and re-envision personnel to move children towards greater and greater self-actualization, towards greater and greater flourishing, towards children being children, then I think we've succeeded as a society.
I should point out the Nine Network is actually involved in that Gallup student poll
Yes.
as well. Other countries, other parts of the country doing it differently, things we should be copying?
We're certainly seeing a movement across the country. It comes from a lot of places. It's interesting, you know, the movement from child welfare to child well-being is one way of thinking about this shift. Another, from the community's perspective, is we often have many concerned parents who, out of a burden from often their own experience, tackle one issue. They become very passionate about teen pregnancy. They become very passionate about substance abuse, these things that can be a detriment to the things they had hoped for their children and the kids want for themselves, right? And there's a big transformation happening on the community side, where there's parents recognizing they keep showing up at all these tables, and it's the same with the people who care, and why aren't we thinking about this together from the whole child's perspective instead of as an issue? And so yeah, we're seeing community after community come to the realization that you can't achieve outcomes in one area without also achieving outcomes in the other area, because it's the same kid and they're interrelated. And so we're starting to see community organizing differently, and that has big implications on how we do research, and it's having great implications on how we measure.
And not only is it like a city by city or a regional effort, it's actually a national and an international effort. And at a symposium today, Anne Robertson, my colleague at Washington University, spoke about how Scotland is trying to measure child well-being across the entire nation. And these are the sorts of efforts that I think we would do well to emulate.